So my solver has finished running, and now we are going to spend this video looking at the outputs and the user interface of GTO Plus and how to interpret or read the outputs. We can first see that my solver ran down to an accuracy of 0.06. In this case here, that unit is big blinds. Those are the units that I noted here in the starting pot size and the effective stack size. And that reflects 0.92% of the pot. So the solution here means that neither player can be maximum exploited for greater than 0.92% of this pot. So we're somewhere in that less than 1% range from, and that's within that range somewhere is where the true natural equilibrium lies. Our solution is kind of in that range as well too. So it's somewhat close to the true natural equilibrium here. It took just under 300 seconds or just under 5 minutes to actually run this solution here. You'll also see that prior to running this solve, both of these options were split evenly at 50-50. Now you can see that this out of position player here is actually checking 100% of the time, and we'll go through the solution itself. I can click on any one of these individual nodes and it's going to take me to that particular node of the game tree. So I'll start by clicking on the out of position player here. And whenever I click on any of these, it's going to populate this whole bottom section. And this whole bottom section is going to look exactly the same, or I should say the layout of the bottom section is going to look exactly the same, no matter what node I actually select. And what will change will be the actual allocation of the data within that bottom section. So in this case here, at the macro level, we can say that this player here, the out of position player, is checking 100% of range and betting 0% of the range. And we can confirm that by looking down here at the actual range itself. And you can say each individual hand is checking basically 100% of the time. So I want to show a little bit more nuance here. So actually, to demonstrate this screen, we're going to go to the in position player when the out of position player checks. So we're going to follow this node of the game tree here and click on the in position player. You can see I can navigate through the game tree using this top section here. So if I wanted to go to the check raise after a small bet, I would go to this part of the game tree and I could see that option here too. So I can work my way through the game tree using this option up here. But before I actually kind of show you and demonstrate that functionality, I do want to walk through this whole section down here to show you the various details that are here within the output. So at this point here, we're looking at the in position player's strategic options for when the out of position player checks, which, as we've already noted here, the out of position player is checking 100% of his or her range. So the first thing you can see here is, again, macro level, how much of the range is betting large, how much of the range is betting small, and how much of the range is checking. You can see here too, actually, it's fairly split somewhat evenly. 32.6%, 31.7%, and 35.7% are the ways in which these various hands are, or various combinations are split amongst each of these individual options. I can go down into the hand level view, and look at the grid and see each of these individual hands, how much they're being chosen to bet large, bet medium, and bet small. And then I can even drill in even further to the individual combo level and see how much they're being bet large, bet medium, or bet small and checked. You can see too that I have the same options here before, that I did in the previous pre-flop options of display methods. I can look at things all at 100%. I don't recommend you doing this. It's good if you, especially if there's not a lot of combinations that are within range. But again, it's really, this can be a little bit confusing sometimes, especially if you have. It's easy to overlook the fact that in some cases here, some combinations, you don't necessarily have as much of them in range as you would other combinations. So I wouldn't recommend that. The display method one has some type of shading which, you know, you can see here too. It's hard to tell. In which case, that's why I like display method too. It's a little bit easier to see that, well, king 10 off, queen jack off, queen 10 off, jack 10 off, king 7 off, hands like that, they're not all in range, and we can account for that a little bit more easily visually. There's also this normalization option here that you can actually normalize hands and view things that way. First things to note here, at the bottom of this screen, this has kind of the overall details of the entire range. So I can see the pot size at this portion of the game tree. This is going to vary based on whatever node I'm at. So if I click this large bet size, you can see the pot size changes, right? I'm going to go back to this option here. The pot size is going to be the same pot size as our starting pot size because the out of position player checked. It shows me the stack size to call and the odds. In this case here, it's versus a check, so I don't have anything to call. But again, if I put this large bet size here, it shows me for the out of position player facing this bet, they have to call 4.3, and their odds are they're getting 2.5 to 1 in order to do so. For this player, I can now see how many overall combinations of hands are in the range. So we have 249.4 combinations of hands, and then how they're split between the large bet, the small bet, and the check, which is nice to actually see it that way. It's also broken down by percentage. I can see the overall equity of this entire range against the out of position player's range, as well as what the equity of the large bet range, the equity of the small bet range, and the equity of the check range. And then finally, I can see the EV of the overall range, the EV of the large bet, the EV of the small bet, and the EV of the check. And then I do like when you hover over this, I can also compare this to the villain's EV. So we can see here at this particular node, the in position player has an EV of about 4.1 big blinds. The villain's EV, or the out of position player's EV, is 2.4 big blinds. There's some options right here. GTO Plus gives you some really good options to either visualize things or copy them out of GTO Plus for use in other other tools like Excel or Microsoft Word or whatever the case may be. So if I click on this T, this is going to give me my entire range that I actually have, and that I can actually copy this range and paste this into whatever other option, you know, whether I want to use this externally somehow. I have this range in a text format. I can actually copy that text, that range out and use it somewhere else. This also includes, if you can kind of look here, you can see the weighting. So, you know, I'm just showing this King 7 suited here. So King 7 suited is weighted at 60.6% and so on and so forth of all of the other hands within this range. This option here, which is this little arrow out, if I click that, now I can see each of the individual hands, the equities, how many combinations, and how it's being broken out across each of the individual strategic frequencies. It's essentially this table, and I can copy this to the clipboard and paste this into something else. This is super useful if you want to do some additional analysis in Excel. We'll cover this in a later module, but we can export this data out of GTO Plus for some further analysis or for further manipulation of the data into, you know, some sort of other tools. And there's finally this option here, which is this little graph, and it lets me really just visualize this data a little bit differently here. I can look at this at the individual hand level. I can sort things by equity, by EV, by the individual strategic frequencies, and there's just different things that I can actually do here. And again, I can also even just copy paste this information out here too. So GTO Plus has a lot of ways of taking this information and visualizing it and or exporting that data out. Individually, you can see each of these individual hands. So at the combination level, so this is not even just showing pocket nines, I'm going one level deeper than the overall hand level, and now I'm at the most granular combination level. For each individual hand, I now can see the hand, the equity of that hand, and that's how this is organized. This is organized by equity and how many combinations that I have of that particular hand. And a lot of them are 1, but some of these other hands like Jack 10 offsuit, we only have it 30% of the time, or in that case here, 31% of the time, and how those combinations are split from the large bet, small bet, and check options here. So a lot of different ways in which to visualize this data, from the very macro level to the individual hand level to the micro level. And the middle level, which we haven't really covered here is this hand class level, which is just above the hand level. We can see sets, 2 pairs, over pairs, etc. You've already kind of seen what this functionality does. I love this hand class area because the hand class area lets me visualize portions of this range. Suppose I want to just look at sets. I can hover over this and it'll show me the 3 hands that denote sets. If I want to look at 2 pairs, it shows me the only 2-pair option that I have in range. Over pairs, these are the 3 over pairs that I have in range. Top pairs, etc. This is where I really, really like the functionality of GTO Plus, is when you can start using the various options of interfacing with the output here. So you can see at the top of this right here, it disappears since I wasn't hovering over anything. But as I hover over something, so I'm going to hover over the set here, it'll say right click to filter for this statistic. So if I right click here, now I can move my mouse wherever I want on the screen. And it'll only show the sets. Also here on the left side, it still only shows the sets, but now I can see, instead of looking at the hands, now I look at the individual combos that are sets. And each time I'm hovering over the individual combination, the hand that actually aligns to that particular portion of the range is highlighted. So now I'm hovering over the top hands in range here from an equity standpoint are pocket 9s, which may be surprising to you that these 2 pocket 9 combinations here, the ones with the heart, have the highest equity. They're actually higher than pocket jacks. And the main reason here in this case here is the pocket 9s here have the heart. They block potential heart hands that do have equity in our opponent's range. And in most cases here, in this scenario here, pocket 9s is not that much different than pocket jacks, particularly because our out of position player doesn't have a ton of pocket jacks in range here too. So pocket 9s actually has, the ones with the hearts, has the most equity in this player's range, just a little bit more than the pocket jacks. But at the end of the day, all of these sets have a lot of equity against our opponent's range. Not quite 100%, but almost 90% equity, or in this case here, just over 90% equity against the out of position player's range. So by hovering over any of these, I can look at portions of the range at the hand class level and analyze things at that hand class level. So this, I can truly go down from macro, the overall range level, to the medium level. So maybe I want to look at top pair, to the micro, looking at hands, to the super micro, looking at the individual combinations. The other things I can do here is I can actually lock portions of this range to do some analysis. I do this a lot too, which is, suppose I'm hovering over the individual hands in range and I want to look at Jack 10 offsuit hands. I can click F9 on the key, and when I do so now, this box up here is going to lock whatever I was hovering at that given point in time. So now I can release this, I can hover around and look at everything else, and the individual combination box is only going to show what I have locked already. And it's going to stay that way until I deselect this or I hit F9 again. We've been looking at everything at the combination level. We can work through and look at the percentages. And that's what this is actually just going to change. It's not going to change anything on the screen except for this specific column. So these areas are going to stay the same. Hand, the distribution of strategic free options, the equity, all of that stays the same. But this right column here will change based on what I select. This is going to show the combos. This will show percentages based on combos. And this one will select the EV. And I can also use the shortcuts of F1 for combos, F2 for percentages, F3 for EV. I also can look at things at the entire decision, or if I want to maybe parse out portions of the range to analyze, I can look at just the large bet range, or just the small bet range, or just the check bet range. And the rest of this screen is going to align to what I've actually selected on this screen right here too. But I'll go back to the entire decision so we can look at things holistically. Working down to the bottom of the screen here, I can edit this portion of the game tree, and I'll cover that in the next video when we get into really how to node lock. But you can actually kind of change this to lock and edit decision, and this is how you would edit the game tree or edit particular combinations and maybe slot some of those combinations into some strategic frequencies in order to rerun the tree and node lock for a particular scenario or fix a portion of the game tree to answer a particular question. We'll cover node locking a lot in some future modules, and I'll walk through how you would do that in this next video of GTO Plus. But let's finish going through the actual output within this video before we actually dive into the node locking portion. As I mentioned here before, at the top of the screen here, I can navigate my way through the game tree, and I can go to whatever node that I want to. When I want to move forward to turns or to rivers, I would enter. So suppose we want to look at the check option, and you can see this 2 of hearts that's here. And we don't necessarily have to pick the 2 of hearts, but if we click on this, it's going to pop up all of these options to be able to pick a specific turn. Now I could pick one of these options, or I can actually use control and arrow, and that can let me quickly work my way through the various options. So suppose I want to look at the King of Diamonds, and I pick King of Diamonds. That'll take me to the next street, and it'll bring me a next row. It'll take me to the next row on the next street, in which case I can now look at the turn and analyze the turn the same exact way. The rest of the screen you can see is the same way. The cool thing here is these hand classes will vary a little bit here too. So now there are straights possible. The King of Diamonds brings a straight onto the board. So now the best hand is not sets anymore or 3 of a kind. The best hand is a straight. So we can actually, and if we looked at the King of Hearts, there would be flushes and there would be straights, right? So this will vary based on what options are available for us. Now there's also additional draws. There's nut flush draws, there's second nut flush draws, third nut flush draws, etc. So there's all of the hand classes here will vary based on the individual cards on the board. There's also some options up here in the top right. So I have this arrow, and I can select the arrow, and what the arrow is going to do is it's actually going to open up a brand new GTO Plus window that I can work with here and resolve based off of what I've actually selected. So maybe I want to just kind of parse something off and look at this portion of the game tree. So starting at the turn, I can do so by opening up this new window here and diving in and maybe like kind of splitting off a node of this game tree into an additional save, which is a really cool way of kind of shifting gears, but then maintaining the integrity of the initial solve from the flop. You also have this circle, which if I click this circle, you're going to start seeing this accuracy go down a little bit more. And what that's doing is it's now resolving everything from the turn. And this lets me get a little bit more accuracy here too. So suppose, again, I didn't want to necessarily parse out into a new game tree. But I did want to get a really accurate picture of what this solve looks like. I can let this run down as much as I want. and I can let it get to an exact solution, or I could just stop it. And at this point here at 0.04% accuracy or 0.03% accuracy, I'm going to click it again. And now you'll see these percentages have changed a little bit here, and this a little bit more significantly based on this solve and this King of Hearts. Now I've gotten some pretty good level of accuracy from this portion of the game tree with those particular ranges. This is a little bit more of an accurate view than when I just started at the flop and I'm looking at the King of Hearts turn and what's actually stored at the overarching level. So, again, as you get down to and you're navigating down into turns or into rivers, you can continually resolve things to get at a more granular level of accuracy from that node of the game tree. The other option from an output standpoint here is I can click on turn reports. And turn reports are really, really, really cool when we're not necessarily concerned at one particular card. So suppose we want to look at this check option and we want to see, well, the King of Hearts can come, right? But also the King of Clubs can come, the Queen of Clubs can come, the Five of Diamonds can come, and we want to have a good plan for what do we do on any number of cards that might come. Well, that's where the turn report will come into play. And by clicking the turn report, what that's going to do is it's going to open up this screen where I can see all of the different possible turn cards that can come. And this is a really cool view because I can look at each individual player and how each individual player's range performs against for each of the individual turn cards. So maybe I want to look at equity, right? And I'll click on equity first. And I can see for the out of position player what cards are really good for the out of position player and what cards are not so good for the out of position player. So we can see just by looking at from an equity standpoint, the out of position player, the green cards are going to be the best ones for his or her range. So hearts are going to be pretty good for his or her range, keeping the equity at or above 50%. Tens are going to be good. Eights are going to be good for his or her range, presumably because the in-position player would likely be betting those hands because they're draws. They're going to complete a lot of draws, and rather than be checking back those non-made hands on flops, they would be betting those hands. So if we reach that turn on a check line, those cards might be better for the out-of-position player. Hands that would not necessarily be as good, or cards that would not necessarily be as good, are jacks or nines or sixes or aces. The in-position player is going to have a good amount of coverage in range on checkbacks. If we can go back to the flop, we can see here that jacks, there's a decent amount of jacks that are checking back. There's a decent amount of nines that are checking back. There's a decent amount of ace highs that are checking back. So those cards have the in-position player has a lot of good coverage of those cards, and as such, the out-of-position player, those cards are not going to be as good for his or her range. Now, you can look at this heat map here from an equity standpoint. You can look at it from an EV standpoint. You can look at it from a betting frequency standpoint here too. So it's a cool way of visualizing the entire gambit of cards that may come out and how one person's range performs against the other person's range. There's a few different options here to visualize this information here. And we're looking at this value right here. We're looking at this grid. There's this graph, which, again, I don't really use it super often. I don't think this is the best way of visualizing things here too, but I can actually just graph this from a top to bottom standpoint of whatever metric that I've selected, so equity or EV or betting frequencies, and I can see visually kind of how all of these kind of compare to one another. This one here it's in more of this kind of grouped bar chart format, and I can look at each of the individual cards, and for each of those individual cards, it will show hearts, clubs, diamonds, spades, and whatever metric that I've selected. I'll go back to EV here again, and it's going to show the EV of each relative suit compared to... It's a good way of comparing suits within each of the individual cards. And then the final one here is a way of distributing strategic frequency. So this is a really good way of visualizing very quickly for when each of these individual cards come out, how does this person's range kind of split up, and how does each person's range at a macro level organize amongst the various strategic options. We've been looking at this all from player one's perspective here at this first node of the turn, but we can go through the entire turn. So maybe after looking at checks, we want to look at player two's options and what player two would be doing at all of these individual cards. And again, you can look at this from player two's perspective here. You can look at this from player one's perspective if player two bets small. So really the options here are very limitless in terms of how you are looking at the various outputs. And as I've mentioned here in previous examples, there's always this option here of this arrow where if I want to take this particular node and do some more analysis on it within Excel, I can click that arrow and take this data, copy it, and paste it out of here into Excel and do a lot more analysis on here as well too. So really, really a lot of information that you can do and analyze here based on the overall outputs of the individual game tree. And if I went to, and I have the King of Hearts here, if I went to check, and I went to the river, I could do that same exact thing with a river report here. And first I'm gonna have to actually resolve this before it actually shows me the river. And it's doing that right now, and I can stop it whenever I want. And then I would get that same option where I can see all of the actions for every single river card here. I can look at individual lines and go look at all of the individual actions for both players at all of the individual nodes of the game tree. I also here, go back to the turn report, I also can look at this at a specific hand level. So maybe I want to look at, well, how does 8-7 of diamonds perform? And I can just click 8-7 of diamonds, and now it's going to take just that specific hand, and I can look at all of the same information, but how just 8-7 of diamonds performs compared to our opponent's range here in this spot too. So a lot of just cool ways in which you can use a lot of this information to manipulate the game tree and look at just different how the model performs based on the options that you've actually selected. So this is the base level of output information that is displayed. In the next video, what we're going to actually do is walk through, well, how do you actually manipulate some of this data? We're going to look at how you can actually node lock individual combinations or hands, or really change anything about the strategic frequencies in order to find the answer of a very specific question that you might have given a conditional element of the game tree. So stay with me, and I'll see you in that next video.